Hi, welcome back to the Fantasy Ball Profits. My name is Rob Scuderick. Thanks for joining me tonight. So we're going to do the Week 11 start sit video, just give you some information, some food for thought in terms of who you may want to start sit. But before we get into that, I just want to say thank you to all you those who watch the videos and have subscribed. We thank you for your support. This is the first year that my son and I did this, but we're really looking forward to building on this going into next year. We want to offer more videos, better information. But we're going to do this based on your support, your notifications. Go ahead and link on them so you get updates on new videos. Your subscriptions and your input is really important to us. So on the bottom of the videos, send us information in terms of what you'd like to see for the rest of this year going into next year. Now, before we get in the video, we always try to offer you what we call a solid information based on facts, numbers, trends, team information, things like that. Now, of course, that information changes daily, and so what we give you today might be different by Friday or certainly by Saturday and Sunday. And so if you have specific questions, ask us in the bottom of the videos, and we'll give you specific answers to your team based on the most updated information that we have. Now, we're just going to give you some food for thought, things that you want to consider. But this time of year, really the margin for error is getting smaller, things are getting tighter. Playoffs are right around the corner, and so I think about this. Like last week, I had two guys that looked at T.Y. Hilton or Juju Smith-Schuster, who I would start. I went back and forth, and I really wasn't sure. And I went with the veteran. I started T.Y. Hilton. It ultimately cost me the game. If I had played Juju, I would have won. Worked out okay. I'm still 8-2 on the top of my division. I'll be okay there. But those sort of mistakes or those sort of missteps can certainly cost you this time you're looking at the playoffs. So we want to give you as much information so you can make the right decisions for your team. And the other thing we want to remind you guys, you need to take this information, you need to put in the context of your league. I can't take into account your scoring system, waiver wire availability, bench strength, all those sort of factors. So you got to take this information and put in the context of your league. So let's get started to Week 11, Game 1. Steelers versus the Titans. Well, let's look at the quarterbacks. We'll go ahead and break those down. Let's look at Marcus Mariota. Well, Marcus has been really disappointing this year. He's only averaging a passing touchdown per game. Now he plays the Steelers, who have the third fewest, or allow the third fewest points to quarterbacks. So if you look at how he's been this year, the struggles he's had, how well the Pittsburgh defense has played, he's not a guy that I feel very confident. If you have no other option, you can start Marcus. But I would say with playoffs right around the corner, I think you need to look elsewhere as far as a quarterback in terms of who you want to look at there. Now, what about Ben Roethlisberger? He's another one that many would say has been a disappointment. In some ways, he has been, and yet I think a lot of times if you look at his numbers, he hasn't been too bad. Now, last week, we consider a letdown game versus the Colts, yet he still managed 236 yards and 2 TDs. Now, he now faces the Titans, who got the 14th most points to quarterbacks. Now, if you look at that number, 14th most, it doesn't look that great. But I think, actually, the Titans are actually a lot more vulnerable to the pass than we realize. Those numbers, 14th most, were quarterbacks. When they played quarterbacks, for example, they played Dalton, Cutler, Kessler, Brissett, Bortles. They padded those numbers. But if you take a look at some other games where they faced Wilson, Carr, and Watson, they got lit up. So I think the Titans defense is actually vulnerable to the pass. And for that reason, I would say that Ben Roethlisberger is a good play this week. He's a good, safe play. You can trust him. Now, as far as running backs go, Le'Veon Bell, I don't need to start you. He's a no-brainer. He's a must-start every week. He's what we call a matchup-proof player. Not saying that every week he's going to have huge numbers, but it doesn't matter who he's playing. It doesn't matter what the matchup is. Le'Veon Bell is a guy that you need to start out there. Now, what about the Titans running backs? Well, right now the Steelers give up the 13th fewest points to running backs. And you look at DeMarco Murray. Now, last week he had 3 TDs, so it looked like he had a great week. And in fantasy numbers, he did. But in actuality, he really struggled. In fact, he struggled the last 4 games, averaging 3.1 yards per carry. So he's really struggling. He's battling through some issues. Now you add on his age, he's not the same explosive player that he once was, but because of his role, because they are giving the carries, especially around the goal line, he's somebody you can't ignore. So you look at DeMarco Murray, he sits at around a running back 2 to 3 this week, depending upon your league size and your league rules. Now what about Derrick Henry? Derrick Henry has actually been more effective than Murray in terms of yards per carries. The concern I have with Henry at this point, 1, he didn't get the goal line carries last game, but 2, he's really non-existent in the passing game, so Derrick Henry sits as a running back 3 this week. Now, what about the wideouts in this game? Well, the Titans give the 8th most points to wide receivers. Antonio Brown, a guy just like Le'Veon Bell, you're going to start him pretty much every week. You're going to start him this week. And then Juju Smith-Schuster. Well, he's at TD 3 weeks in a row, and you look in the last 2 weeks, he had 290 yards receiving. He moves into what we call the wide receiver 2 or 3 category. Definitely a guy that you got to start now. He's a quality wide receiver, got a great matchup. The youngest player in the NFL. This guy not is good right now, but if you're in a keeper league and you've got this guy, he looks great for the future. Now let's take a look at some of the Titans wide receivers. Well, they face the Steelers. Steelers give up the 3rd fewest points to wide receivers. So Rishard Matthews is a guy who's averaged 57 yards per game. That's not that great. And some owners still seem to be in love with this guy. But if you look at his production this year, 57 yards per game isn't that good. Now he's playing a very good Pittsburgh defense. Now you bring Corey Davis into the mix there, who's stealing some of his targets. He's a guy that you could start. I would say he sits at around a wide receiver 3 or 4 this week. He's not great. I'd like to look elsewhere if I could. Corey Davis is the guy that came back, rookie sensation, who's out for quite a while, injured. Last week he saw 10 targets, very talented. Just missed a touchdown. He was reaching out to the pylon, the ball slipped out of his hand and missed it. Would have been a touchdown for him. But he's still a rookie, and he's going against a very good pass defense, so I would probably sit him this week. Now, what about tight ends? Well, none of the Pittsburgh tight ends are guys that I'd feel comfortable starting. And then Delanie Walker. Well, Delanie Walker is a tight end that has a very tough matchup against a Pittsburgh defense that's very good against tight ends. But you need to start him, but you have to lower your expectations this week. I would expect that maybe you could have 5 catches, 50 yards around that range. Nothing spectacular, but it would be an adequate start for you. As far as kickers go, Ryan Succop is having a good year, although he has a tough matchup. He's start worthy, but don't expect a great game from him. And Boswell is actually a safe play for you. He can start him. As far as defenses go, I would start Pittsburgh and I would sit Tennessee. Tennessee's really only had one good game this year, and it was against Cleveland. And it seems like everybody has a good game against Cleveland. I would sit Tennessee. The Bears versus the Lions. Well, let's look at Mitch Trubisky. He actually looked better last week after struggling as a rookie. Now, he was playing a weak Green Bay pass defense, but he had 297 yards and a passing touchdown. But if you look at it in 5 games this year, he only has 3 touchdown passes. And if you look at one of the touchdown passes against the Vikings, really a fluke that was off of their safety's hands. Should have been an interception. Popped it up in the air, landed in the wide receiver's hand. So really, he hasn't been that good. He's really had his struggles as a rookie. I wouldn't be comfortable starting him. Now, he does have Dontrell Inman, who they brought in. They traded for him. He does become their number 1 wideout. He faces a good Lions defense, or allowing the 10th fewest points to quarterbacks. So you look at who they're playing, you look at the struggles he's had, stay away from Mitch Trubisky there. Do not start him. You must be terribly desperate if you feel like you need to start him this week. Matthew Stafford. Do you start him? Well, he plays the Bears, who give up the 4th fewest points to quarterbacks. So the Bears' defense has been good against the pass. Now, if you look at Stafford, he's actually faced some good defenses this year. He's played Minnesota, Pittsburgh, and Carolina. And in those games, he's fared fairly well. He's only really had 1 bad game all year. I would consider him still a safe pick as a guy that you can start this week. And then, you add in now the fact he's playing well. He's had Jones and Tate, but Kenny Galladay is back, and Eric Ebron starting to step it up. Last 3 games, he's been more effective. So you add all that in. I wouldn't expect a big game from Stafford, but I think 225 yards and 2 TDs is a very fair expectation for him. As far as running backs go, well, let's look at the Lions. Lions give up 3rd most points to running backs, so you need to start Jordan Howard. Now, if you look at Jordan Howard, he's still having a really good year if you consider the context of where he's playing. His yards per carry are down compared to last year, but teams are loading the box versus him. That's what they're doing. If you're playing right now Chicago, their best weapon is Jordan Howard, so you load the box, you sneak up a safety, you do whatever you can to shut down the right, and yet he still had 3 games of over 100 yards and 5 touchdowns, so he's got a nice matchup. He's a guy that you have to play. He's a league guy. He's going to get a bulk of the carries. You can start Jordan Howard. I would say Tariq Cohen. That whole thing is just right now. He used to have some PPR value, but that's not the case anymore. How about Amir Abdullah? Well, if you look at him, the Bears give up the 10th most points to running backs. So the running back for the Lions, Amir, do you start him? Well, he's had back-to-back weeks with a TD. He's got some goal line carries, but he hasn't broken 100 yards once this year, and his yards per carry are at a career low right now. So he's a guy that sits as a running back 3. You can play him. There are probably better options out there, but some of you I know are getting pretty desperate right now for running backs with buys and injuries. If that's the case, you can start him. Theo Riddick has some PPR value, but not high end. He's not extremely reliable, but if you're in a PPR league, you can let Theo Riddick. He does have 32 catches on the year. As far as wideouts in this game, Dontrell Inman, we talked about, was traded to the Bears. He is their number 1 man right now, and he had his first game last week. The 6'3" receiver had 6 catches for 88 yards, and that's pretty good. I would say in that offense, because of who he is, the fact they're probably playing from behind, they'll need to throw it. I would sit him as a wide receiver 3. You can play him. He's available in a lot of leagues out there if you're looking for a waiver wire pickup. The other Bear wideouts, I would sit all of them. As far as the Lions wideouts, we got to start Tate. He's on pace for 100 catches, 1,172 yards, so he's a safe, solid start for you. Now, Jones, he had 3 big weeks in a row. Now, last week, he disappointed with 1 catch for 22 yards. What happened there? Was it Kenny Galladay that came back? Was it an off week? He's going to revert back to the way he was before the 3 weeks before. It's hard to tell, but I would say this. He's playing the Bears, get the 11th fewest points to wideouts, but he's been too good lately, Jones, to just sit and ignore. So I would still consider starting Jones, but I would consider him as a wide receiver 2 to 3 also. Galladay is a great young rookie. Had 2 touchdowns the first game. He was out wild for injuries. He came back. He had 60-some yards last week. He's not a guy that you want to look as a weekly start yet. He's more of a guy you want to keep your eye on or watch him long term. He's got some dynasty value. Maybe he'll develop in a couple weeks, but right now you don't want to start him. As far as tight ends in this game go, I would sit Eric Ebron. He's looking better the last 3 weeks, but he's still not great. And of course, Zach Miller going down with the injury last week. Adam, I think his name is Shaheen. I don't know how you say that exactly. It really doesn't matter. He's a guy you need to sit. He did okay. He's still a rookie. He's still a tight end for the Bears, an offense that's not very high octane, so I would go ahead and sit him. As far as kickers go, I would start Prater. I would sit Barth. As far as defenses, I would start Detroit. The Bears give up a lot of points to defense, and I would sit the Bears. Unless you're really desperate, the Bears aren't a bad play, what we would call a mid-range start. So those are things to consider in that game. Jags versus the Browns. Well, let's look at quarterbacks. Blake Bortles, he plays the Browns, who are actually decent against the pass as far as how many points they allow to quarterbacks. I wouldn't start Blake unless you're really, really desperate for a number of reasons. One, he hasn't been great. If you take away his big Week 3 anomaly against the Ravens, he's averaging less than a passing TD per game. Once you can take that, he had 4 touchdown passes versus the Ravens. You take that one game out, that's an anomaly. He's averaging less than a touchdown per game. This team wants to win on playing defense and running the ball. They don't want to get into a shootout. I think that's what they're going to do. This is going to be a very low-scoring game, I would imagine. So for that reason, I wouldn't play Blake Bortles. As far as DeShone Kizer, might be Kizer, maybe Kessler. I know there's some injury concerns there, although it looks like Kaiser's going to start this week. He did play better last week. Don't start him for many reasons. Here's why I wouldn't start him. There's so many reasons why you shouldn't. 1, it's the Bears. 2, it's Kizer, and he's playing the best defense in football right now. The Jags are lights out. They are the best defense. They shut everybody down, and they're allowing the fewest points to quarterbacks, so please just stay away from him. It'd be suicide to start him. As far as running backs go, Fournette came back last week, and he struggled. Now he faces the Bears, who are actually, or the Browns, I'm sorry, that are actually tough against the run. Now, even though the Browns are tough against the run, Fournette is a must-start running back one. He should rebound this week. That brings us to the Browns running backs, Isaiah Crowell. Now, he's played a lot better the last 2 weeks. He got jump on his step. He's running explosively. He looks powerful. His yards per carry have been good. He's seen targets in the passing game. I do have concerns with him, and this one is tough because he plays the Jags, who are very good. It's going to be a low-scoring game, I assume. Now, if you take a look at the Jags' defense, they're sitting around the 9 or 10 mark in terms of points allowed to running backs, but I think they're actually a lot better than that would indicate. They've had 2 big games, Todd Gurley, and then the Jets had a huge game against them. If you take those 2 games away, the last 4 games, the Jags are averaging 2.5 yards per carry. For this reason, I would think Isaiah Crowell is a running back 3 this week. The one good thing about Isaiah Crowell, he is a lead guy. You know he's going to get at least 14, 15, 16 carries that game. But he's doing it against a very tough defense. Very good likelihood that they could fall behind this game and have to throw the ball. Duke Johnson has PPR only value in that, and so don't even consider it. And even then, I think he's a tough play against a very good defense. As far as wideouts go, I would sit all Browns wideouts. Now we know Corey Coleman's coming back, and I think that Corey Coleman could be a good option in the future. But right now, against the Jags, his first game back, I would stay away from him. You could start Marquez Lee as a low-end wide receiver 2 or 3. Last 4 games, he's been good, but I think once again, this is going to be a low-scoring game. And the Browns are good at shutting down the wideouts. So I would stay away from starting anybody else. You could start Lee as a wide receiver 3. I would stay away from Hearns or anybody else. As far as tight ends go, it's a good matchup for Mercedes Lewis. Yet if you look at the fact that he's got low targets and low volume, and he hasn't been all that great. He had 1 big game earlier in the year. He's a guy I'd probably stay away from. I would sit all Browns tight ends. I would sit kicker Zane Gonzalez, but I would start Josh Lambo. As far as defenses go, you obviously start the Jags, and I would sit Cleveland. Packers versus the Ravens. Well, Joe Flacco, let's look at him. He's playing the Packers, who give the 17th most points to quarterbacks. Now, he's a guy that I suppose you could consider a 1-week plug and play, but I would say buyer beware. They really has struggled this year. If you look at him, in 9 games so far this season, he has 8 touchdown passes to 4 interception 9 games. So he's really struggling. He's averaging less than a touchdown pass per game. He's got more TDs than he does more interceptions than touchdown passes. Now, he might get Danny Woodhead back this week, and if he does, Danny Woodhead would be a huge boost in that passing game. He's a great running back out of the backfield who catches the ball. But right now, he's questionable. So Joe Flacco, if you're really desperate, he is a plug and play at a defense that will give up some passing yards. But right now, Joe has just really laboring. He's really struggling all year long. I wouldn't feel really comfortable with him. If you have to roll with him, go for it. Hopefully you can find a better option. As far as Brett Hundley goes, he plays the Ravens. The Ravens give up the second fewest points to quarterbacks. Now, if you add to that, here's what the approach we see with the Packers now that he's quarterback. They're asking him to do very little. They've reduced down that playbook for him. He's not Aaron Rodgers, obviously, in his ability to handle that playbook or even his skills or his gifts as far as his talent level goes. And he's really asked to be a game manager. So they don't want him to make too many mistakes. That does not equate for a good fantasy quarterback, so I would stay away from him. He's had 1 TD pass last 3 weeks. There's certainly better options out there than Brett Hundley. As far as running backs go, Montgomery, it sounds like he's going to be out. He re-injured his ribs. And Aaron Jones sounds like he's going to be at least 3 to 6 weeks with an injury. That leaves Jamal Williams. Jamal Williams is what we would say is a running back 3 this week. He hasn't been impressive. Last week he had 20 carries, 67 yards, and on the year 3.3 yards per carry. He hasn't looked great. The one reason why I think that he's worthy of consideration as far as starting goes is he's going to be their lead back for the game. They don't have a lot of options at this point. They're really thin in the running back position, so he will get a bulk of the carries. As far as Al Collins go, he's got a decent start this week. He plays Green Bay, who gives up the 12th most points to running backs. Now, the one concern I have about Al Collins is Joe Flacco is not playing great. They're not moving the ball well, and he hasn't got pay dirt yet. Hasn't gotten the end zone. So Al Collins is a decent start, not a great start. We look at Allen, the running back for the Ravens. He's really only a safe play if you're in a PPR league, and even then he's very hit or miss. As far as wideouts go here, well, Green Bay gives up the 5th most points to wideouts. Mike Wallace is really not relevant in terms of fantasy wideout this year until we either see Flacco improves or if Macklin were to go down. If Macklin were to go down or if Flacco would play better, Mike Wallace might have some value. Right now, I would stay away from him. Then Jeremy Macklin, he's been banged up all year. He's played injured. He missed some games. But he's actually had some success on the field. He's got 3 TDs for the year. In his last game he played, he had 8 catches for 98 yards. So I'd say that Macklin's a wide receiver 3 play this week. As far as tight ends go, I would sit all tight ends. I would start Tucker. He's a great kicker. And Crosby had his first real good game last week. Beyond that, there's so many question marks with him and Hundley in that offense. I would sit him. As far as defenses go, I would start Baltimore. I would sit Green Bay. Let's look at the Buccaneers versus the Dolphins. Well, Ryan Fitzpatrick, well, the vet hasn't looked good. He hasn't been horrible, but he hasn't looked great. Now, he does get his best weapon, Mike Evans, back this week, who was suspended, so that's going to be a huge boost for that offense. Played in Miami, allows the 15th fewest points to quarterback. So he's somebody that you can start. Probably best to find somebody else that you can trust in more than him. He's not a terrible play. He's not a great play. So it depends upon, one, how deep your league is, the injuries. If you're in a league that starts 2 quarterbacks, for example, then he's somebody you want to consider. But most of you probably want to pass on Ryan Fitzpatrick. Let's look at Jay Cutler in this game. Now, Jay is a good option this week to fill in. He's playing a bad Tampa Bay defense, allows the 6th most points to quarterbacks. Now, what happens is there's been a huge boost added Drake. Since Drake and Williams taken over after the J trade, the passing game has really picked up. Parker's come back also. That's been a great addition. In the last 4 games, you look at Cutler's improved. Last 4 games, he got 9 TD passes, only 3 interceptions. So he's not going to be a great pick, but he's not going to lose the game for you this week. So if you got to use Jay Cutler, he'll be all right. As far as running backs go, now last weekend, we said that Drake was really the better running back over Williams in terms of just being a pure runner. And I think he showed it last week. He had 7 carries for 82 yards and a TD. He looked really good since J has left. So 2 games in a row, he's looked explosive. He looks like the better running back, and I think this is certainly going to be his team going forward. Now he plays the Bucs, who got the 6th most points to running backs. I would start Drake as a running back too. In fact, I would say in this week, Drake is even in that borderline running back 1 conversation. Some of you would disagree on that, but we'll let the numbers speak for themselves after this week. I would sit Williams. He has PPR potential, but he's not trustworthy yet in this game. As far as running backs go, we're talking about Tampa Bay gives up 3rd most points to wide receivers. So Tampa Bay, 3rd most points to wideouts. You need to start Parker and Landry in this game. They're both good starts. You need to start Evans. He's wide receiver 1. No matter who he plays, he's the guy you're going to start. Now with Evans back, Jackson becomes a wide receiver 3 or 4, closer to a wide receiver 4. He's not having a great year. He had a little bump last week because Evans was out, so we bumped him up. And he had a decent game, 6 catches. I think he had 84 yards. So he's all right there. As far as tight ends go, Brait has a great matchup this week. But since Winston has been hurt, his numbers have really dropped. In fact, these are the Lions' last 2 games. 1 catch, 9 yards, and 1 catch for 10 yards. Before that, though, he was Mr. Consistency. Now he plays Tampa Bay, who allows the fourth fewest points to tight ends. If you look at the Tampa Bay linebackers, their defense isn't very good, but the one thing they do well is they shut tight ends down. And so I would sit Thomas this week. As far as kickers go, Tampa Bay's Murray's worth a start. I would sit Parquet. As far as defenses go, I would sit Miami. They've had 1 sack the last 3 games. And I would sit Tampa Bay in this. What about the Rams versus the Vikes? Well, we'll talk about fantasy football, but forget fantasy football. This should just be a fun game to watch. These are 2 teams that are playing really well right now. Of course, I'm a Vikings fan. It's at home. Go Vikes. I hope they can win. Now, as far as fantasy football goes here, what about Case Keenum? He plays the Rams, who allow the 11th fewest points to quarterbacks. Case has had some surprising games this year. We have to admit, he's had a number of games where he's averaging over 300 yards passing and 3 TDs. So in 3 games against Washington, Cleveland, and Tampa Bay, he's had over 300 yards, averaging 3 TD passes. He's looked really good. But if you take that out, if you look at the remaining 5 games, he's only had a total of 2 TD passes. Now, he has some underrated weapons here. If you look at Adam Thielen, if you look at Diggs, they are very good wideouts. A lot of people ignore how talented they are. So, should you start Case? Is he a guy you could look at? Well, what I think is probably going to happen is I assume that Goff and the Rams, who lead the NFL in points scored as a team, could put up some points and force Case to have to throw the ball. Now, I know the Vikes don't want to get in a shootout. I think they want to keep it low score and play defense. I think the crowd noise is going to play a factor there. But if he's somebody that you need to take a flyer on, he's got a decent ceiling. I should say a decent floor, but a low ceiling at this point. So I would be careful in case somebody could start. Another one of these guys, he's been all or nothing. He's been great, or he's been pretty disappointing. So that's kind of where I would say he falls in terms of that. As far as Jared Goff's go, should you start Jared Goff? Well, last 2 weeks he's lit it up. In fact, he's got a total of 666 yards the last 2 weeks and 7 TD passes. Now, that was against two bad pass defenses. Now they're playing the Vikes at home, and they allow the 8th fewest points to quarterbacks. So Goff did really well, but now he's got a challenge to him facing the Vikes in Minnesota, who allow the 8th fewest points to quarterbacks. He is worth somebody that you can play at this point. It's hard to ignore his value, but I would temper your expectations if you start Goff. As far as running backs go, you got to start Todd Gurley. Obviously, he's leading the NFL in touchdowns. He's a guy that you need to start. It doesn't matter. Even though the Vikings are good against the run, he's still back that you're going to play. Now let's look at the Rams. The Rams allow the 7th most points to running backs, so I would start Murray and McKinnon. Both of those guys are worth a start at this point. The Vikings are really heavily relying on both backs. But what I would say with both of them is because they're both relying on them both and they're sharing carries and stuff like that, it really kind of lowers their value to a running back 3. As far as wideouts go, the Rams are good against wide receivers. They allow the 8th fewest points. So the Rams allow the 8th fewest points to wideouts. Adam Thielen and Diggs are too good to sit, obviously, at this point. That'd be a major mistake to make. But they're not in the wide receiver 1 conversation. Though Adam Thielen had a lights-out game last week. Shocked a lot of people. You look at the game this week, I think you have to bump them down to wide receiver 2 consideration. Let's look at the Rams wide receivers. Now, we've been talking about Woods for a couple weeks, and he had a huge week. We told you guys that he was the number 1 guy. He's the guy that you can trust in that offense more than any other guy, more than Watkins and Kupp. So hopefully you took our advice. He's been playing great, but if you look at Minnesota and Xavier Rhodes, they have a tendency to shut down opposing teams' number 1 wideout. Now, wideouts have done okay against the Vikings, but their number 1 wideouts have gotten shut down. So Woods really is kind of considered the wide receiver 1 for that offense. I think you'll see a lot of Xavier Rhodes. So I'd say Woods falls into wide receiver 3 category this week. You look at Watkins. Now he's had TDs 2 weeks in a row, but that's only on 3 catches on a total of 5 targets. I'd stay away from him. And Cooper Kupp, I like him, but he's a year away from being somebody you can rely upon. He's a sit. As far as tight ends go, you got Kyler Rudolph. He's a start, but he's a low-end tight end this week. Now it's sit all Rams tight ends. As far as the kickers go, the Vikings kicker's done great. You could start him and the Rams kicker. Both of those kickers a good start this week. As far as defenses goes, the Rams play the Vikings, who allow the 4th fewest points to defenses. Now, the last 4 weeks, the Rams have put up good numbers on defense. So I think you need to start the Rams, but you need to consider them a defense around the 10 to 12 category this week. I would start the Vikes playing at home. Now, the Vikes are a little bit confusing right now because they're playing good defense, but they haven't been a good fantasy football defense. But they have far too much talent to ignore, and so I think the Vikes are start worthy. Let's look at Washington and the Saints. Well, let's look at the quarterback play there. Well, first one you have Kirk Cousins. He plays the Saints. Now, defense is much, much improved. In fact, it's surprising how this team has totally turned it around. They used to be known for Drew Brees throwing the ball up 400 yards a game, when now it's the opposite. The running backs are amazing. The defense is playing well. But if you take a look at that defense, that's improved greatly. They've done it against some very bad offenses and some bad quarterbacks. In fact, that defense has padded their stats against quarterbacks like Taylor, Fitzpatrick, Trubinsky, Hundley, and Cutler. If you look at that defense when they faced Brady, Bradford, and Stafford early in the year, they got lit up. So I think Cousins is a solid play, even though New Orleans defense is playing better. Now, with Kelly out in that game, the running back Kelly, I think Cousins is going to have to throw the ball a lot more, and him having to force to throw the ball, I think, is going to be good for Cousins. Simply by volume alone, he could have a good day. I look at Drew Brees. He's a guy you need to start. Well, he's a future Hall of Famer. Now, he's not put up his typical numbers. Like I said, they don't need to rely upon him to throw it for 300 yards. They run the ball so well with Ingram and Kamara. So, do you start Brees? Well, I think you need to start him, but what I don't expect him to do what he used to. He's not getting 350 yards and 3 TDs, but you could get 225, 1 to 2 TDs, so he's a safe play. As far as running backs go, I would sit Samaje Perine in this one, even though everything would say he's got a good start, and he will be the starting running back. At least he'll be listed as a starter, but right now he's been terrible this year, 3.2 yards per carry. I would say Samaje Perine, even though he's a starting running back there, he's a running back 4. I would stay away from him. There's nothing about him that I like in this matchup. I would start Chris Thompson. He gets a huge boost with Kelly being out. He's a PPR stud. In fact, I think he's going to rebound this week. Last 2 weeks he's been quiet. I think they're going to involve him in the offense a little bit more. I like Chris Thompson, not just in PPR leagues this week. I actually like him in standard leagues. As far as wideouts go, I know a lot of you really soured on Michael Thompson, the first-round pick. For many of you have been disappointed, but going into this week, we said, hey, you know what? I know the numbers don't seem to be great, but he's got 50 catches. He's on pace for 100 catches. He's still a talented guy. He's a guy that you need to start week to week. I hope he stuck with that advice because it paid off. He had a huge week. Now, this week, he's still a good start, but he's not a great start, so you need to start him. If you look at Ken Gibbs Jr., he's playing the Redskins, who give the 10th fewest points. I would sit him. As far as the wide receivers for Washington goes, that one's been really confusing for me. Crowder's been coming on the last 2 weeks. He's probably your safest play there. Pryor's a non-issue. Grant really is a non-issue. And then you think about Josh Doctson. He's a guy that's coming on. He's looking better and better. He's starting to evolve into a player that they thought he was when they drafted him in the first round. But I'm not sure he's arrived yet, a player that I'd be comfortable starting. So really the only Washington wide receiver I would consider starting is Jamison Crowder. You could start him as a wide receiver 3. As far as tight ends in this game, if Reed plays, start him. If he sits, go with Davis. Davis, as he's been filling in for Reed, has been great. In fact, Davis the last 2 weeks has been great. He's had 6 catches for 72 yards and 7 catches for 76 yards. I would sit Fleener. He's been terrible all year. Don't even consider him. As far as kickers go, I would start Lutz. I would sit Rose. As far as defenses go, I'd sit Washington. And I would start the resurgent New Orleans defense. Now, remember those resurgent numbers were against lower-end quarterbacks, but I think Cousins is going to cut down the turnovers, but I still think New Orleans is worth a start at this point as about a defense. I would say maybe 12 to 15 range. Chiefs versus the Giants. Well, Alex Smith. Let's look at the quarterbacks here. Alex Smith. Giants give the 3rd most points to quarterbacks. Smith has cooled a bit. He's still having a really good year. I think a lot of people haven't talked about this guy, but for the year right now, he's at 18 touchdown passes to only 1 interception, and that's in 9 games. So he's having a career year. You can ride this guy out. I would play him this week. He's got a great matchup. As far as Eli Manning goes, plays Kansas City, gives the 7th most points to quarterbacks. Now, the last 2 weeks, Eli has been sufficient. But last week, he played a really bad San Francisco pass defense. And it took a last-second garbage time touchdown to really salvage his day. There's not a lot about this that I feel comfortable with. Eli scares me. New York Giants scare me. So I would say he sits around the 20 range as far as quarterbacks go this week. As far as running backs go, I would start Hunt. I know he's come back down to earth a little bit after his hot start, but he's still a good running back, 1 play. Kansas City gives the 6th fewest points to running backs. So Orleans Darkwa has been very good this year. He's got 5.1 yards per carry. In the last 2 weeks, he had 30 carries for a total of 140 yards and 2 TDs. I like him. The one concern I have about Orleans Darkwa, I think that he's their go-to guy. I think they want to feed him heavily, but my concern, and it has been the case of the Giants recently, is they start to get blown out and they have to abandon the run. And they have to turn the pass, and if they do, well, that really bumps them down to a running back 2 to 3 category. As far as wideouts in this game go, Kansas City gives the most points to wide receiver. Start Sterling Shepard. This guy is for real. Last week, 11 catches, 142 yards. He's not just good because of volume. He's not just a good wide receiver because he's the only wideout that Eli get. This guy is a very talented, very good young wideout who looked good last year as a rookie. Looks even better this year. He's a guy that you got to play. He's got a good matchup there. And really, they play from behind. They've got to throw the ball. He gets a ton of volume, a ton of targets. Sterling Shepard is a must play. There's no other wideouts I would consider starting for the Giants at this point. As far as Kansas City goes, I would start Hill, and there's no other trustworthy options as far as wide receivers on the Chiefs. They have some other guys that spread the ball around, but nobody that you can depend on there. As far as tight ends go, you need to start Kelsey. Kelsey's had TDs 3 weeks in a row. Now, let's take a look at Evan Ingram. He plays Kansas City, who's actually good against tight ends, but I think you need to start Evan Ingram. He's had TDs 4 weeks in a row, and this guy has got real talent. He's a very talented young tight end. Everything in the preseason, the coaches couldn't stop talking about how talented, how amazing he was, how athletic he was, how quick he was. Going into next year, a lot of magazines, I guarantee, will have him ranked in the top 5. He's got Gronk, Kelsey, and Ertz type talent. So now I know that he's got a tough matchup, but Eli doesn't have a lot of weapons. I would start Evan Ingram. I would sit Rosas. I would start Buckner, the kicker for Kansas City. I would start Kansas City defense and sit the New York Giants. Texans versus the Cardinals. Well, let's look at this here. What about Drew Statton as quarterback? Well, he did fine versus Seattle defense. He had 270 yards passing and a TD. Now he plays Houston, who gives up the second most points to quarterback. So Statton's actually a guy who could be a low-end start for you. Still makes me a little nervous, but I think he's done enough, and he has a perfect matchup this week. He'd be a low-end start if you're desperate once again. If you need to start 2 QBs, if you have injuries, whatever, is Drew Statton's guy that you could start. Now, what about Tom Savage? Well, he's looked brutal. Last week he looked bad against the Rams, threw 2 interceptions. He only had 221 yards passing. I would say avoid him. I would sit him this week. As far as running backs go, the Cardinals are tough against the run. And so you look at Lamar Miller. Well, ever since Watson's got here, Lamar Miller's numbers have dropped, understandably so. But you can't ignore Miller, and the biggest reason why is he's the number 1 guy there. He is their lead back. He is going to get a bulk of the carries. He's going to be in the field a lot. And for that reason, he's a guy that you still need to consider starting. I would say temper your expectations, start him as a running back 2. What about Adrian Peterson? Well, Adrian Peterson's played 4 games for Arizona, and he's had 2 great games, he's had 2 very poor games, and his performances are in proportion to the opposing team's run defense. The 2 games where he had great games, he played run defenses that going into the game were very poor. He's had 2 very poor games running the ball, and those were against defenses that were really tough against the run. So now he plays Houston, who get up the second fewest points to running back. So Adrian is a guy, don't expect a big week from him. He's a running back 2. You need to start him. Like I said, he will get a volume. He'll get volume there. He'll get a bulk of the carries. You need to start Adrian Peterson, but I would temper your expectations. He runs in proportion to the team that he faces in terms of ability to stop the run. So that's what I consider. As far as wideouts go, I would start Larry Fitzgerald. He plays Houston, gives the 4th most points to wideout. Now, if you look at last game, Larry Fitzgerald was quiet in the first half, but Sherman went down with an injury, and he exploded in the second half, and he finished with a total of 10 catches, 113 yards. Larry Fitzgerald doesn't seem like he's slowing down. He's a good start this week. I would sit all other cards wideouts. You look at J.J. Nelson, Jaron Brown, John Brown. They end up sharing the targets. None of them are trustworthy. Yes, occasionally I have a good game, but you're really rolling the dice with any one of those guys. I would stay away from all 3. And with Savage at quarterback, I would sit Fuller, which is really too bad because Fuller was looking great when Watson was in there. I need to start Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins is able to maintain numbers. Even last game, he had a good day. He's still a talented wideout that you need to start even with Savage at quarterback. As far as tight ends go, C.J. Federowicz is back. He plays the Cardinals, allowed the 9th most points to tight ends. C.J. is actually a quality tight end. Played well week 1, had a concussion, was concussion protocol, just came off the IR last week and played. He only had 2 catches for 10 yards, but now I think second week back, I think you'll see him get integrated in the offense a little bit more. I would sit Cards tight ends, and I would sit both kickers if you can afford to do that. I would start Arizona's defense, and I would sit Houston's this week. Chargers versus the Bills. Well, let's look at Tyrod Taylor. Well, last week he reminded me, anyway. Some of you guys love Tyrod Taylor. I've always been spooked by this guy. He reminded me last week why I feel like he can't be trusted. He had 9 completions for 56 yards and an interception for a total of 2.94 points. Now he plays the Chargers, allow the 12 fewest points to quarterbacks. Some of you will need to start him simply because you don't have other options out there, but he's a risky start this week. Obviously, he's going to do better than he did last week. He's certainly going to rebound. But I don't like Tyrod Taylor as a guy that you can trust. As far as Phillip Rivers goes, right now, Phillip Rivers is in the league concussion protocol, and so he's questionable to start this week. So you got to keep your eye on that. Now he plays the Bills to get the 5th fewest points to quarterbacks. If he plays, I'd say if Phillip Rivers sits at about the 15th quarterback in terms of rankings go, he's number 15 around that range. So not a great play. He's an okay play for you. As far as running backs in this game, Chargers give up the fourth most points to running backs. You need to start McCoy. Now, I know he's had struggle for 2 weeks, but I think this is the week he gets back on track. Here's what's going to happen. Some of you out there are frustrated because McCoy's been quiet 2 weeks, and you're going to sit him, and when you do, he's going to explode. Just like a lot of things that happened to T.Y. Hilton owners when they sat him and he blew up for 175 yards in a TD. LaShawn McCoy is a guy that you need to start out there. Look at the Bills right now. The Bills give up the second most points to running backs. For that reason, you start Gordon this week. Now, what about Eckler? I know he had a big game last week. A lot of people are excited. Well, I'd say Eckler has flex and PPR value. But personally, for me, if I'm looking at starting him, I like to see a little bit more before I feel comfortable trusting him, especially this late in the year when you need to win games to get in the playoffs. You could use him in flex position or if you're in a PPR league, but I'd rather wait one more week just to see what his role looks like. So you have to be careful about not getting caught up in the hype. That happened earlier this year with Tariq Cohen. Everybody blew up, said he's going to take over the running back position. Jordan Howard's done. We here at FFP said, wait a second, that's not going to happen. Jordan Howard's going to be your guy there. Don't get caught up in the hype. And now, sure enough, Tariq Cohen is really non-existent in that offense. As far as wideouts in this game go, well, let's look at Kelvin Benjamin. I know a lot of people out there are very excited him going to the Bills. And kind of what I felt, and I still feel is going to happen there. We're going to see similar value they had in Carolina. I wouldn't expect a lot. I would say this week he has wide receiver 3 value. I would sit all other Bills wideouts. I'd start Keenan Allen as a wide receiver 2. Now, he's had a drop in targets the last 4 weeks, which has coincided with a drop in statistics. So last 4 to 5 weeks, he hasn't been that great, but I still think he's the #1 receiver there. And for that reason, you got to start him. Start him as a wide receiver 2. As far as tight ends go, I would start Hunter Henry. Now, last week he had a quiet week, but he played the Jags. That is expected. The Jaguars shut everybody down, so don't worry about it. Hunter Henry should get back on the board this week in terms of having a good week. Tyrod Taylor's favorite target, Clay, came back. First 4 weeks he was his favorite target. Now he's back from knee surgery, but he's playing the Chargers, who are tough. So I would start him as a low-end tight end 1. As far as kickers go, I would start Novak. I would sit Novak, and I would start the Bills kicker. As far as defenses go, I would start the Chargers, and I would sit the Bills. Now, the reason why I would sit the Bills, they play the Chargers, allow the 7th fewest points to the Bills, and the Bills the last 2 weeks have had a total fantasy points of -2 points in Yahoo standard scoring, so I would sit them. The Broncos versus the Bengals. Let's look at Andy Dalton in this game. But since week 2, he's played a lot better, minus a week 9 stinker against the Jags. So in week 9, he really struggled against the Jags. But once again, that's against the Jaguars, so you can just throw that out. Jaguars shut everybody down right now. They make everybody look bad. Now he plays the Broncos. Now the Broncos are usually a good defense, but they've been picked apart lately. The last 2 weeks, they were picked apart by Wentz and Brady the last 2 weeks. This defense is not the defense of old. But I think they're good enough to make to lower the value for Andy this week. If you need to start Andy Dalton, I think he's an okay start. I think he's not a great start. Broncos aren't the defense they once were, but I think we can also expect that defense will rebound a little bit. Let's look at Brock Osweiler. Well, he plays the Bengals, who give the 6th fewest points to quarterbacks. Brock has not been impressive. He's averaging around 210 passing yards, 1 TD, passing TD per game. I wouldn't risk playing him if you can avoid it. Look elsewhere. As far as the running backs go, I would sit Mixon. Keep waiting for this guy to blow up. I know he's got a lot of talent, but right now he's averaging 3 yards per carry for the year, and Denver is very good against the run, so I would sit Mixon. And I would sit all Broncos running backs, and here's why. That's a 3-headed monster at this point. You've got Anderson, Booker, and Charles, and it's really hard to know who you can trust in that offense. It seemed like they were trending towards Booker, and then last week Charles has a good game. Broncos still list Anderson lead back, so who do you roll with there? And it's hard to trust him, so I would just stay away from all 3 of those guys. As far as wideouts go, the Bengals give up the 5th fewest points to wideouts. So that lowers the value for guys like Thomas and Sanders, Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders. Their value gets lower, but Sanders came back last week. He had a good game, 6 catches, 137 yards. They have a tough matchup, but they're too good to sit, so I would start those guys as wide receivers 2 or 3 in that category, depending upon your league size. A.J. Green's a guy you need to start. Now, he does run the potential to get shut down, but a guy like him, here's what happens. The day that you shut him down is like the T.Y. Hilton situation. T.Y. Hilton has been shut down a lot this year. He's had 3 unbelievable weeks. A.J. Green's a guy that you need to start. And here's why. Now, maybe you're different than me. I can live with starting A.J. Green if he gets shut down in a game. But here's what I can't live with. Okay, sitting him, for example, on a matchup play like, let's say, Inman, And then Green's on my bench and he blows up for 9 catches for 150 yards and 2 TDs. Like, I can't live with that. I could live with starting him and he has an off game, but I can't live with putting that type of talent on my bench and he blows up. Just can't do it. You got to play him. As far as tight ends go, I would start Croft. Denver gives up a lot of points to tight ends. I would sit all Denver tight ends. I would sit both kickers in this. As far as defenses go, Denver has a great matchup. They're not the Broncos that they once were in terms of their defense, but the game is in Cincinnati. All those things lead me towards maybe staying away from the Denver defense this week. The Bengals are a good start against Denver. Denver gives up the most points to opposing defenses, so Cincinnati's a great defensive play versus the Broncos this week. Let's look at the Patriots versus the Raiders. Let's look at Tom Brady. He's been lights out since week 1. This is no brainer. You need to start him. It should be a high-scoring game. Start Tom Brady, duh. As far as Derek Carr goes, he plays New England, who give the second most points to quarterbacks. So if you look at Carr, he's got a great matchup, and he's really getting back on track. In the last 3 games, he's averaging 243 passing yards per game, and so start Derek Carr. As far as running backs go, well, here's been a little change. Mike Gillislee was not activated last game. Sunday night, last time he played, they sat him. He seems to be like he's fallen out of favor with the coaches. Now, what this does, this moves Dion Lewis into the lead back role. So Dion Lewis has really overtaken the lead back role there. And last game he had goal line carries. He's had double-digit carries the last 4 games. And now he plays Oakland, who gives up the 5th most points to running back. So Mike Gillislee is not somebody you should even consider starting. In fact, he shouldn't even be on your roster at this point. He should be dropped in all leagues. But Dion Lewis is a guy that you should start this week. Now, with Dion Lewis, he's a guy that you need to start, but I would say that he has a lower ceiling. He sits as a running back too. Because of his size, they're going to limit his carries, and they love in New England's offense to spread the ball around, so you can expect about 12 to 15 carries and maybe 2 to 3 targets in the passing game. So he's a safe option, but not a great option. You look at Rex Burkhead. He's had 3 TDs last 2 games. He has flex appeal. He's a great receiving back. In fact, if you look at it, he's had 10 catches for 95 yards the last 2 games, so he's high value in PPR leagues. Beyond that, it's hard to trust Rex. If you're in a PPR league, you could play him. In a standard league, I would stay away. You look at White, the running back White in there. He has PPR only value. And so if you're in a PPR league, you'd start White. In PPR leagues, 5 of the last 6 games had double-digit points. Beyond that, he's not a great play. Let's look at New England. New England gives up the 8th most points to running backs. Lynch has struggled all year. He's averaging 3.8 yards per carry, and he's been very quiet. If you look at Lynch, he's what we would say is touchdown dependent at this point. He's a guy that's going to get you about 15 carries, 50 or 60 yards, but if he doesn't get in the end zone, he doesn't hold a lot of value for you, and so he's going to be very hit or miss. Now you look at Washington and Richard, the 2 other backs there, and those are guys that actually could be nice plays. Here's the problem with both of them. They're very similar. They actually both weigh 205 pounds. I believe they're both 5'8", both have similar skill set. And because they're so similar in their skill set, size, and how they function in that offense, they steal targets and carries from each other, and therefore reducing the value for both of them. So I wouldn't start Washington or Richard, but if either one of these backs were to get injured, which would increase the carries, the targets to the other running back, then I would definitely start those guys. As far as wideouts go, I would start Cooks, but I would sit all other New England wide receivers. None of them are trustworthy, at least until Hogan comes back. What's happened there is Hogan went down, Edelman went down, but a lot of those targets have been absorbed by the tight ends and the running back positions. Now you look at New England, they give up the 2nd most points to wideouts, so you need to start Cooper and Crabtree this week. As far as tight ends go, you need to start Gronk. That's no brainer. Gronkowski is somebody you start every week. And then look at Cook in this game. Cook is a guy who's really come on the last 3 weeks. In the last 3 weeks, he's averaging 6 catches for 97 yards. So Cook is a tight end that I would start in this matchup. I would start both kickers, and I would sit both defenses. Let's look at the Eagles and the Cowboys. Carson Wentz and Dak Prescott are both solid plays, especially Wentz. Start both of those guys. As far as running backs go, you could start Morris. He's the running back 1 there. He looked good in relief Zeke last game, but now he plays Philadelphia, who allows the 5th fewest points to running backs. Now, if they fall behind this game, which is very reasonable, something you could very reasonably assume, if the Cowboys fall from behind and they have to throw the ball, Morris doesn't have a lot of value in the passing game. He's not good in the passing game. He doesn't catch a lot of balls out of the backfield. For that reason, you could start Morris, but I would bump him down to your running back 2 to 3 status this week. I think he'll rebound next week to running back borderline 1 or 2, but this week I'd say he's a 2 to 3. Start J.I.J. I can't wait to see what he's going to do in a full game where he actually has a good offense around him. I think this guy's going to be lights out from down this far. In fact, I would say moving forward, J.I.J. could be a top 5 running back every week. I would sit Smallwood, Clement, and Blunt simply because there are too many mouths to feed. They both share carries. What they're getting at this point is going to be scraps from J.I.J. As far as wideouts go, I'd start Alshon Jeffrey. He's really starting to get chemistry with Wentz. The offense is starting to really connect. I would start Jeffrey. And they're playing Dallas to get the 7th most points to wild. So all those reasons, Alshon Jeffrey I think is a good play this week. Then I look at Nelson Aguilar. Well, he's been quiet last couple weeks. Now they get Ertz back. So I would lean towards sitting Nelson Aguilar unless you have no other options. He's averaging 4 targets the last 4 weeks. That's not great. As far as tight ends go, I would start Ertz, obviously. Then you look at Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia gives up the 8th most points to tight ends. Witten is a decent veteran start. He's got a high floor but a low ceiling, so you could start him. As far as kickers go, start Jake Elliott. The guy's been lights out. I would sit Nugent. As far as defenses go, I would start Philly and I would sit Dallas. And to the final game of the week, let's look at the Falcons and the Seahawks. Well, Russell Wilson plays Atlanta, who gives the 15th fewest points to quarterbacks. Right now, Wilson's playing at a very high level, but they can't run the ball. That's a great combination. Once again, he's playing great. They can't run the ball for anything. He has to throw it. That equates to great fantasy value. If you look at that last 4 games, Russell Wilson has 11 touchdown passes, only 3 interceptions. Russell Wilson is a must start. As far as Matt Ryan goes, now he plays Seattle, who gives up the 8th fewest points to quarterbacks. Now, if you take a look at that stat, I heard something this week that was very interesting. It said when Chancellor, Sherman, and Thomas all play together, they're a shutdown backfield. But if one of those guys is out, the quarterback ratings jump by 20 points. Well, as you guys probably know, Sherman is going to be out for the year now. He tore his Achilles. And so I think that drastically changes how good Seattle is against the pass. For that reason, I think Matt Ryan is a safe start this week. Let's look at the running backs. Well, Freeman is doubtful right now. That makes Coleman a great must start. Then I would sit Rawls. He had a chance to step up last week. He did not look great. He had a very quiet game. No Seattle backs can be trusted. As far as wideouts go, I would start Baldwin, and of course you got to start Julio Jones. That's a no-brainer. And I would sit really all other wideouts in this game. From time to time, you'll see Sanu get a touchdown, or if you look at Richardson or Lockett, they can be good, but they're just not trust enough. They're not enough consistency to trust any of those wideouts in this game. As far as tight ends go, I would start Graham, and Hooper is a fair play in the game. He's not a great play, but he's a fair play. As far as kickers go, I would start both kickers. As far as defenses go, I would start Seattle, and I would sit Atlanta. Now, last week, Atlanta had 8 sacks against Dallas, but that was the all-pro lineman Smith out, and now he plays with Wilson, who's a much more mobile quarterback. That's kind of where we sit in terms of our thoughts and start sits this week. If you have any specific questions, thoughts concerning your lineup, leave them at the bottom of the video. We'd love to answer them. Once again, thanks for joining us here at FFP. God bless.